Hi, Dr. Bill here. I'm super excited to do this next Meet the Mentor with a very dear friend of mine, and I'll tell you something very special that he gave me in just a moment. Why do we do these? Well, the Meet the Mentor actually came out of our LEAP program. What's LEAP? LEAP is an entrepreneurship program for high school and college students aged 15 to 25 that we've taught at UCLA for the last 16 years. What do we teach? We teach students skills to be successful in life. And the coolest thing about LEAP is that I've asked so many of my celebrity patients and business leaders to come and help, and they do. We've had Mark Wahlberg, Paula Abdul, Michael Strahan, Kathy Bates, Anthony Hopkins, Apollo Ono, Eric Garcetti, Jason Alexander. I mean, I can go on and on and on. And these people come and share the secrets of their success with our LEAP students. Typically, we get about 500 to 550 students every summer, and we literally pack them with so much information. It's like drinking from a fire hose. And one of the parts that the students love most is when we bring in these mentors. So we started this Meet the Mentor series because we didn't want this to just be a one and done week. We wanted to do it throughout the year and continue to give these students great information from great mentors to teach them how to do businesses in every field you could ever imagine. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to my dear friend, Dr. David Hill. He received his doctoral degree in pathobiology in 1983 from the University of Connecticut, the same year I graduated dental school. He became co-director of the John Muir Medical Center's in vitro fertilization program in 1986 and director of the Center for Reproductive Medicine at Century City Hospital in 1987, which is where I met him. Since 2000, Dr. Hill has served as scientific director for various reproductive centers in California, the largest of which was a Beverly Hills-based organization rated the top 10 infertility centers in the U.S. and I think worldwide in 2005. He currently owns and operates the first IVF laboratory in the Central Coast, which also serves the needs of patients in the Central Valley. Dr. Hill has published, lectured, and taught on various aspects of assisted reproductive technology for nearly 40 years. On a personal note, 25 years ago, Dr. Hill helped me have my beautiful twin daughters, Charlie and Georgie, for which I am eternally grateful. And in reciprocation, I introduced him to his beautiful wife, Marianne Gauchi. They've been married 24 years, Dr. Marianne Gauchi, who was our last mentor and for which he is too eternally grateful. David, thank you for coming.
Pleasure.
So your wife saves lives,
Right.
You make lives. That has to feel great.
It does. It does. It's a. It's been an interesting career. Not something that I started out thinking.
Yeah.
I was
How
gonna
did
do,
you
Bill.
actually get into fertility?
You know, it was a kind of a. I can remember my first year at University of Connecticut, where I was working towards a PhD, and I was operating an electron microscope there. We had a little department, and I literally remember holding in my hands the Life magazine that said the first test tube baby was born, because that was the year that I started at University of Connecticut.
I actually remember that magazine.
Yeah, I still have it.
Wow.
But little did I know that my path would lead me to a career in that. And I graduated from University of Connecticut. I then did, as a lot of doctoral people do, you do another year or so of indentured servitude, which is called a fellowship, and I did that in Boston for a year. And then I came back to California, which is where I'm from. It was in California that I was working with another scientist, and we were interested in growth factors that might be present in the fluid that is taken out of patients that are having in vitro fertilization. There was one of these laboratories within the complex that I worked. So I went to go and see if I could obtain some of that material, and the director was only about a year and a half older than I was, and you know, Bill, how in life sometimes you'll meet people and you'll just instantly have a connection with them, you
Right.
like them. And Glenn and I were that way, and he said, "Oh, you really got to join me in this. It's a new field, it's dynamic." And I said, "Well, I can't really do that. I just got here." So I resisted for about a year, and then I finally was drawn to it by repeated interactions with this other scientist, and so I joined him. And then a year later, there was a opening at a hospital in the Los Angeles area, which was Century City Hospital, and I threw my hat in the ring, and I got that job. And you know, you talk about just things that happen in life. They had been struggling, that program, for a few months, and I arrived there, literally put my bags down in the afternoon in the office of the vice president of the hospital, and he said, "Man, am I glad to see you. You got a case tonight."
Wow.
So I said, "Oh." So it turned out that that very first patient that I did became pregnant, and they hadn't had one in a while, so they thought, "Wow, we've really got a great guy here." And I knew it was just something smiled on me. Anyway, that launched the career, and we went from doing about 75 patients a year to about 1,000 or plus in by the end of 1999. And during this time, the field itself, as I'm sure you know, has evolved and gotten more efficient.
Oh my gosh, I remember, so, you know, personally, my wife and I had our first daughter, no problem. And then, you know, for the next 5 years, we tried and tried and tried, and
Right.
we just couldn't conceive. And David and I became friends in the lunchroom at Century City Hospital.
Right.
And then we became patients, and he gave me my beautiful twin daughters. And I remember at the time we did this, there was about a 16 or 17% chance that every embryo transferred would actually become a child.
Right.
I'm sure that's gone up today.
A lot.
What
a
is
lot.
it
now? Back in the 80s, 90s, we would routinely put back 3 embryos, 4 embryos, hoping that maybe one of them would take.
Right.
And the way it's evolved now, 30 years on, is now these embryos have about a 50% chance each.
Wow.
So you can't really put back more than one
Right.
unless there's a real reason for doing so.
I mean, unless you actually want twins.
If you
I mean,
actually want twins, it's different.
right. We started with 4.
Yeah.
And I remember at the first ultrasound, we had triplets. And Evelyn was not happy about that.
Right.
Then at the next ultrasound, we had twins, and we
Yeah.
had 2 very
Yeah.
healthy baby girls.
Yeah.
But
Well, that really was one of the bigger issues with assisted reproductive technology was the multiple pregnancy rate, and it's gone down because the embryos we've gotten better at selecting and growing them. So now, you know, we strongly encourage people to just put back one, but sometimes if there's an age factor, if there's some other kind of a factor that you have to take into consideration, we may put back 2. But you can put back 1. I remember putting 1 back in one patient, and it split twice, and she had identical triplets just from that one embryo.
oh my goodness.
So
and
it
that
can happen.
happens 1 in a gazillion
Oh,
times.
yeah. But
Well-
we, you know, so it's been gratifying to be involved in this field where we've just gotten so much better at it.
Yeah, and it's funny because growing up, we probably, and I went to a large high school with your wife.
Right.
There was maybe 1 or 2 sets of twins in a high school with 3,000 students.
That's right.
My kids grew up, half the kids in their class were twins.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
The odds are overwhelming that they came
what's
from
happening to mankind? I mean, why are people having such a hard time getting pregnant? Is it the hormones that we're taking and milk and food and things like that? Or is it that we're starting to have kids at a later age? What is it that's happening?
I think, Bill, it's a combination. The average maternal age for patients that come to these fertility programs is about 35. So that's older than people that conceive naturally, generally speaking. And so it's this advanced maternal age. And as you know, with men, yes, men do, it gets more difficult as they get older to cause conceptions, but not nearly like it is with women. With women, it becomes, if they want to have a family, it becomes kind of a creeping non-choice. If you're going to do it, you're going to have to decide, because the chances of it working and you becoming pregnant as you approach 40, the chances go down. And there's not much that we can really do about it unless we do kind of an end run around it and use eggs that are donated, and we have egg banks now.
Well, and that's a whole nother thing. I mean, I'm hearing about a lot of women now in their mid-30s, freezing their eggs.
Right.
What's that all about?
Well, it speaks to the potential of the egg as it relates directly to the age of the woman who is donating it or is consigning it for cryopreservation. So the younger you are when you do that, the greater the potential, the fertility potential is of the egg. And women are, if they haven't found the right partner, they just haven't found the right life for themselves that they then want to bring a child into the world, it's better if they're in that situation to go ahead and freeze those eggs now, even if you aren't planning to use them, in the immediate future.
So, then you have the option of surrogacy.
Yes.
I mean, there are women that can't carry. At what point do you think we'll be able to do this all in a lab and not even need a surrogate mother?
Right. Well, I don't know.
How close are we to that?
Well, I read the same sort of forward-looking, projections about it that you do, and I can tell you that right now we are able to culture these developing embryos in our lab, and really they're pre-embryos. I know it sounds like I'm splitting hairs, but the real definition of an embryo is not what the stage at which we grow embryos in the laboratory and transfer them into patients. But in any case, we can grow them about 8 days, 9 days, and they have an awful long way to go before we're, just Brave New World kind of stuff. But I don't know, what the future brings. I mean, when we started, the success rate from embryos that we would freeze and then thaw and put back in patients was 1%. Globally, wow. It was 1%. And now, freezing them after and then having the patients come back about a month or two later is the preferred way to do things now.
Yeah. I think kind of the coolest part of us being friends and this whole path that we went down is I actually watched the conception of my kids. Yes. You and I sat with those twin microscopes,
right.
And you were showing. It was crazy.
Yeah,
it was crazy.
Right.
And then I remember, there were like 13, embryos, and okay, well, here's 11 good ones, and then it was the whole thing was so fascinating.
It is, and of course now in the last decade or so we have entered an era of what's called pre-implantation genetic evaluation and testing of embryos, which is a wonderful thing. As we know, there are heritable disorders in mankind, and there's over 1,000 of them that we know. And depending on what that disorder is, if it's either what's called dominant or recessive, you either can avoid it and be a carrier, or you might be affected, or you may not be carrying that recessive trait at all. We can test for that in embryos before we put them back in the patient. So
let's talk about something like Tay-Sachs.
Yeah, well, Tay-Sachs
is a recessive trait.
Yeah, it is. So what that means is that a certain percentage of the time, if you and your partner both are carriers of Tay-Sachs, you will have a certain percentage, if you become pregnant, that your child is either going to be born as a carrier, just like you are, where you walk around normally, you're not affected by the recessive gene. However, there's also a chance that the baby is going to inherit the recessive gene from both of you, and they will have Tay-Sachs. Or there's a certain percentage where they won't, neither recessive gene will happen, and that'll be fine. So there are so many of those disorders, and if we know ahead of time what we're looking for with patients, we can screen the embryos for that disorder, and then a decision can be made by the part of the patient.
Yeah. So just for the lay person, you have actually three possibilities. Either you'll have a child that's completely normal and healthy and is not a carrier. You'll have a child that's normal, healthy, and is a carrier. Or you'll have a child that's not normal and healthy because they got both of the recessive traits,
right. That is right.
and it's always fatal, Tay-Sachs.
Yeah, right.
And so you can test for this early on and not even choose that embryo for your pregnancy.
Exactly, and there's other disorders that are what we call dominant disorders, where if you have that chromosome, then you will have the disease. And there are diseases such as Huntington's and what we call late onset disorders that follow these families down through the generations. What we have the ability to do now is we can screen the embryos for that disorder, avoid putting an embryo back with that disorder, and what you're effectively doing is you're cutting that limb off of the family tree forever. There will never be that fear again.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's terrific. So
what for you has been the biggest challenge in your career? I mean, you've gone and grown and made so many amazing contributions to your field, but for you personally, what did you always find was like the biggest challenge in your field?
Well, for me, the biggest challenge is and remains to continue to refine techniques so when patients come, that they will end up not just financially depleted and childless, but they'll end up being able to have a baby at the end of it. So the take-home baby rate, as it's referred to, has always been a boulder that you're shouldering into, and it's been a huge challenge. Other challenges are that when you're running one of these laboratories, it's a very tightly controlled environment, which of course my wife always compares. When I would go to work, she would say, "You're going into a sterile, controlled environment where everything's under control," and I walk into the emergency room and there's people bleeding and there's chaos. So completely different, but at least her personality can handle her line of work, and she obviously does quite well, and I guess I gravitate more to be behind the lab door, I don't know. But sometimes, despite your best efforts to control everything, Bill, you can't control everything.
Right.
And there may be a period where your embryos don't look like you wanted them to, and just things happen, but then the ship of state will right itself, and you're not sure exactly what happened. So that's always been a challenge for people, where you're really trying to keep everything as controlled as you possibly can.
You've been a leader in your field for 40 years. If you reflect back on your career,
Right.
what would you feel was your greatest contribution to your field?
That's a good question. I have been an educator in it, and I think that's been good. I don't know. People have said to me, "Well, you've really done some terrific innovations," and to give credit where credit is really due, we all kind of stand on the shoulders of those who went before us, and maybe I was a better follower than most. I don't know, but we were able to record a few firsts along the way, but certainly. I would say that the big challenge is if you're in a busy laboratory, you have to be able to identify the embryologists that you train and that work with you, that they will be able to keep a cool head in what they're doing, and it's very exacting work, and people have no sense of humor about a mistake that happens in the IVF lab.
Yeah, no, for sure.
And nor should they. So there's always that human element to be mindful of and be on top of, and keep things going well.
If a student who's watching this
Yes.
is interested in your field
Yes.
and wants to get into this fertility field, what advice would you give them, or kind of a roadmap that they should follow to get to where you are in your career?
Right. So if you want to become a laboratory director, that requires to continue in the biosciences, and you need an earned doctorate degree to do that. If you want to become an embryologist where you work under a lab director, it requires a 4-year degree, and then you need to undergo training in an existing IVF program. And I have done that with dozens of young people through the years, and it turns out that embryologists are very, very much in demand, very much.
I'm sure.
And the compensation is very good, and it's the rules are the same the world over, kind of like tennis.
Right.
You can go to any country and pick up a tennis racket. You don't need to speak the language, but the rules are the same. And you can if you learn how to be a bench embryologist, a clinical embryologist, you can go anywhere in the world with it. So it's a portable profession and trade. And I would encourage young people, if they want to do something that's exciting and international and very, very gratifying, it's a good thing to look into.
So your new center is really focusing on making this whole process a lot more affordable and accessible to people that otherwise wouldn't be able to do it.
Right, and we do work on that. There are fixed costs that are it's hard to really work around them, but we're trying. And the communities that we serve in the Central Coast also reach into the Central Valley, and a lot of our patients come from there. These are people that during the pandemic, for example, they not only did they lose their jobs, but the businesses that they were working for also went under. So it's a struggle, but we work with them. We try to work out some financial plans that work for them, and it's a good thing.
All right, you've had this illustrious 40-year career. What's next?
Well, I don't know. I still can't hit a golf ball straight.
Yeah.
So I'm not real sure where to go from here. Our little center is just off the campus from the State University there, where I actually went for my undergraduate degrees. And that's where a lot of graduates from the animal science department, there's a year-long course that's been there for about 10 years on clinical embryology. And on the strength of that one-year course that these students take, they put themselves significantly ahead of their peers that are graduating just with a bioscience degree. So what we've done now is we have created a situation where the last quarter students that are taking that course will rotate through our laboratory, so they get to experience a working IVF laboratory. And it's added tremendously to the, we think the success of the program will grow even more than it is now. So it's nice, it's one of those pay it forward things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, listen, you have made a huge difference in my life and the life of
likewise.
Thousands and thousands of other people. What you do is literally phenomenal.
It is.
And I really, really appreciate you and thank you. And
my pleasure, Bill.
I also want to give a great deal of thanks to the Citizen Hollywood Theater, where we are filming. It's a beautiful new facility. It is owned and operated with the Salvation Army. We're going to show you a quick little clip on the Salvation Army. If you'd like to help support the Salvation Army and all of the great work that they do, please tap on our QR code at the end and you can easily do a donation. All right? Dr. Bill, over and out.
Love doesn't discriminate. It doesn't pick and choose. When there's so much to fight against, love fights for. When others flee, love runs toward. And when darkness prevails, love doesn't despair. It never feels too small or too weak or too powerless to help. Love knows its worth and remembers its strength. Love isn't pro this or pro that, but proactive and protective. It's never quick to rage, but always quick to courageous compassion. Love gives everything and expects nothing. For 156 years, the Salvation Army has loved all who feel lost. With your help, we'll never stop.